The Russian Airborne Troops of EDV is a military branch of the armed forces of the Russian Federation. They are an elite force, on par with the Strategic Rocket Forces and the Aerospace Defence Forces. First formed before World War II, the force undertook two significant airborne operations and a number of smaller jumps during the war, and for many years after 1945 was the largest airborne force in the world. The force was split after the dissolution of the Soviet Union, losing divisions to Belarus and Ukraine, and has been reduced in size. Russian airborne forces have traditionally worn a blue beret and blue-striped telnyashka and are called descent from the French descente. Interwar and World War II, the first airborne force's parachute jump is dated to the 2nd of August 1930, taking place in the Moscow military district. Airborne landing detachments were established after the initial 1930 experimental jump, but creation of larger units had to wait until 1932-33. On the 11th of December 1932, a revolutionary military council order established an airborne brigade from the existing detachment in the Leningrad military district. To implement the order, a directive of the Commissariat of Military and Naval Affairs transformed the Leningrad military district's 3rd Motorized Airborne Landing Detachment into the 3rd Airborne Brigade commanded by M.V. Boytsov. 2 further airborne brigades and 3 airborne regiments were created in 1936. In March and April 1941, 5 airborne corps were established on the basis of the existing 201st, 204th, 211th, 212th, and 214th Airborne Brigades. The number of airborne corps rose from 5 to 10 in late 1941, but then all the airborne corps were converted into Guards rifle divisions in the Northern Hemisphere summer of 1942. The Soviet airborne forces were mostly used as foot infantry during the war. Only a few small airborne drops were carried out in the first desperate days of Operation Barbarossa in the vicinity of Kiev, Odessa, and the Kerch Peninsula. The 2 significant airborne operations of the war were the Vyazma operation of February to March 1942, involving 4th Airborne Corps, and the DNDPR Kiev operation of September 1943, involving a temporary corps formation consisting of 1st, 3rd, and 5th Airborne Brigades. Glantz writes, after the extensive airborne activity during the winter campaign of 1941-42, airborne forces underwent another major reorganization the following summer, responding to events in southern Russia, where German troops had opened a major offensive that would culminate in the Stalingrad battles. The 10 Airborne Corps, as part of the St-Uka Strategic Reserves, deployed southward. Furthermore, the St-Uka converted all 10 Airborne Corps into Guards rifle divisions to bolster Soviet forces in the south. 9 of these divisions participated in the battles around Stalingrad, and 1 took part in the defense of the Northern Caucasus region. The St-Uka still foresaw the necessity of conducting actual airborne operations later during the war. To have the St-Uka created 8 new airborne corps in the fall of 1942. Beginning in December 1942, these corps became 10 Guards Airborne Divisions, 6th, 7th, 8th, 9th, 10, 2 formed from the 1st Airborne Corps and the 3 existing separate maneuver airborne brigades. The new Guards Airborne Divisions trained in airborne techniques, and all personnel jumped 3 to 10 times during training, though many were from jump towers. After the defeat of German forces at Kursk, the bulk of the airborne divisions divisions joined in the pursuit of German forces to the Dnepr River. Even as 10 Guards Airborne divisions fought at the front, new airborne brigades formed in the rear areas. In April and May 1943, 20 brigades formed and trained for future airborne operations. Most of these brigades had become 6 new Guards Airborne divisions by September 1943. The Stateuka, however, earmarked 3 of these airborne brigades for use in an airborne operation to cross the Dnepr River, which was unsuccessful. David Glantz wrote in 1984, in August, the Stateuka formed the 37th, 38th, and 39th Guards Airborne Corps. By October, the newly formed corps had combined into a separate airborne army under Maj. Gen. II. Zatovakin. However, because of the growing need for well-trained ground units, the new army did not endure long as an airborne unit. In December, separate airborne army, the Stateuka reorganized the separate airborne army into the 9th Guards Army of Kol. Gen. V.V. Glagoliev, and all divisions were renumbered as Guards Rifle divisions. As testimony to the elite nature of airborne trained units, the Stateuka held the 9th Guards Army out of defensive actions, using it only for exploitation during offensives. From 1944 the airborne divisions were reconstituted as Guards Rifle divisions. 37th Guards Svirsk Airborne Corps, Lieutenant General Pavel Mironov. 98th Guards Svirsk Rifle Division, 99th Guards Rifle Division, 103rd Guards Rifle Division, 38th Guards Airborne Corps, Major General, from November 5, Lieutenant General Alexander Karpetokin, Lieutenant General Alexander Utivenko. 104th Guards Rifle Division, 105th Guards Rifle Division, 106th Guards Rifle Division, 39th Guards Airborne Corps, Lieutenant General Mikhail Tikhonov. 100th Guards Rifle Division, 107th Guards Rifle Division, 114th Guards Rifle Division. During the invasion of Manchuria and South Sakhalin operation, airborne units were used to seize airfields and city centers in advance of the land forces, and to ferry fuel to those units that had outrun the supply lines. Post-war, HQ 9th Guards Army was redesignated Headquarters Airborne Forces in June 1946 after the war ended. The units of the Army were removed from the order of battle of the Air Forces of USSR and assigned directly to the Ministry of Armed Forces of USSR. In 1946 the force consisted of 5 corps and 10 divisions. 8th Guards Airborne Corps. The 114th Guards Airborne Division was established in 1946 on the basis of the similarly numbered Rifle Division in Borovka in the Belarusian SSR. The division was disbanded in 1956, with 2 of its regiments joining the 103rd Guards Airborne Division, 15th Guards Airborne Corps, 37th Guards Airborne Corps, 38th Guards Airborne Corps, 39th Guards Airborne Corps at Belarus in Ukraine. In the summer of 1948, 5 more Guards Airborne divisions were created: the 7th, the 11th, the 13th Guards, the 21st Guards, and the 31st Guards. At the end of 1955 and the beginning of 1956, the 11th Guards, 21st, 100th and 114th Guards Airborne divisions were disbanded, as well as all the Airborne Corps headquarters. The number of divisions, thus, decreased to 11. In April 1955 the transport aircraft were separated from the VDV and the Air Force Military Transport Aviation was created. In 1959 the 31st and 107th Guards Airborne Divisions were disbanded, but in October 1960 the 44th Training Airborne Division was formed. In 1964 the airborne forces were directly subordinated to the Ministry of Defense. The creation of the post-war Soviet airborne forces owed much to the efforts of one man, Army General Vasily Margolov, so much so that the abbreviation of VDV in the airborne forces is sometimes waggishly interpreted as Uncle Vasily's troops. Airborne units of 2 divisions were used during Soviet operations in Hungary during 1956, and the 7th Guards Division was used again during the 1968 Operation Danube invasion of Czechoslovakia. The 1st Experimental Air Assault Brigade, the 1st Airborne Brigade, was apparently activated in 1967–1968 from parts of the 51st Guards Parachute Landing Regiment, after the Soviets had been impressed by the American experiences in Vietnam. In 1973 the 13th and 99th Airborne Divisions were reorganized as Air Assault Brigades, and thus the number of divisions dropped to 8. There were also independent regiments and battalions. However, even by the 1980s only 2 divisions were capable of being deployed for combat operations in the first wave against NATO using Air Force military, transport aviation and Aeroflot aircraft. Airborne Troops Commander-in-Chief Vasily Margolov had continued to wear the Telnyashka blue and white striped shirt, commemorating an earlier moment in his career, from his wartime naval infantry service in the Baltic Fleet. In 1979, the Telnyashka became an official part of the uniform, in accordance with a directive of the General Staff from August 3, 1979, to December 1, 1979. The 105th Guards Vienna Airborne Division was disbanded, for the division remained in the city of Fergana. The 345th Independent Guards Airborne Regiment, with the separate 115th Military Transport Aviation Squadron. The rest of the personnel of the division were reassigned to fill out other incomplete airborne units and formations and to the newly formed Air Assault Brigades, based on the division's 351st Guards Parachute Regiment. The 56th Guards Separate Air Assault Brigade was formed in Azadbash, Tashkent Oblast, Uzbek SSR. Meanwhile, the 111th Guards Parachute Regiment became the 35th Separate Guards Air Assault Brigade. However, there was also a mistaken Western belief, either intentional Soviet deception or stemming from confusion in the West, that an airborne division, reported as the 6th, was being maintained at Belogorsk in the Far East in the 1980s. This Maskirovka division was then disbanded later in the 1980s, causing comment within Western professional journals that another division was likely to be reformed so that the Far East had an airborne presence. The division was not listed in VI. Feskov A.L.'s the Soviet Army during the period of the Cold War, and the division at Belogorsk, the 98th Guards Airborne Svirskaya Red Banner Order of Kutuzov Division, moved to Volgograd in the Ukraine in late 1969. The 103rd Guards Airborne Division, 345th Independent Guards Airborne Regiment and the 56th Air Assault Brigade fought in the Soviet-Afghan War. In 1989, the airborne forces consisted of 7th Guards Cherkasy Airborne Division, 76th Guards Chernigov Airborne Division, 98th Guards SVIR Airborne Division, 103rd Guards Airborne Division, 104th Guards Airborne Division, 106th Guards Airborne Division, 242nd District Training Center of the Airborne Forces, created from the 44th Training Airborne Division. However, the divisional banner was retained. The division's full designation in Russian was 44th Airborne Overuk Red Banner Order of Suvorov and Bogdan Khmelnytsky Division, with 3 training regiments. The division was established in Ostrov in September 1960 as the 44th Training Airborne Division, and according to some sources, it was given the fighting banner of the 111th Guards Rifle Division, although the division and its regiments were not Guards units. In September 1961 it was transferred to the Lithuanian SSR. 345th Independent Guards Airborne Regiment, 171st Independent Communications Brigade, air assault units of the ground forces from the late 1970s to the 1980s. 13 separate air assault brigades were activated. These brigades provided airmobile capability for military districts and groups of forces. In 1989, these brigades transferred to control of the VDV. During the same period, 19 separate air assault battalions were activated. These battalions originally provided airmobile capability to armies and other formations, but were mostly disbanded in 1989. In 1979, the 58th Air Assault Brigade was activated as a mobilization unit in Kremenchug. It was co-located with the 23rd Air Assault Brigade from 1986 and disbanded in 1989. The 128th Air Assault Brigade existed between 1986 and 1989 as a mobilization unit in Stavropol. The 130th Air Assault Brigade existed between 1986 and 1989 as a mobilization unit in Abakan. 11th Air Assault Brigade, 13th Air Assault Brigade, 21st Air Assault Brigade, 23rd Air Assault Brigade, 35th Guards Air Assault Brigade, 36th Air Assault Brigade, 37th Air Assault Brigade, 38th Guards Air Assault Brigade, Brest, Belarusian MD, 39th Air Assault Brigade, 40th Air Assault Brigade, 56th Air Assault Brigade, 57th Air Assault Brigade, 83rd Air Assault Brigade, commanders of the Soviet Airborne Forces and Russian Airborne Troops. The Vasily Glazunov 1941–1943. Alexander Karpytokhin 1943–1944. Ivan Zatovakhin 1944–1946. Vasily Glagolov 1946–1947. Alexander Kazankin 1947–1948. Sergei Rudenko 1948–1949. Alexander Gorbatov 1950–1954. Vasily Margolov 1954–1959. Ivan Tutaranov 1959–1961. Vasily Margolov 1961–1979. Dmitry Sukhorukov 1979–1987. Nikolai Kalinin 1987–1989. Vladislav Akolov 1989–1990. Pavel Grachev 1990–1991. Yevgeny Podkolzin 1991–1996. In 1958 he graduated from Alma-Ata Military Parachute School, named after the Supreme Soviet of the Kyrgyz SSR. After his graduation he commanded a platoon, a separate reconnaissance company, and a paratrooper battalion. From 1970 to 1973 student of the Military Academy M.V. Frunze. After graduation he became a regimental commander, and from 1976 by 1980 the commander of the 106th Guards Airborne Division. From 1980 for 1982 student of the Military Academy of the General Staff of the Armed Forces of the USSR Voroshilov. Since 1982, First Deputy Chief of Staff, and from 1986 Chief of Staff of the Airborne Forces, First Deputy Commander of the Airborne Forces. From August 1991 to December 4, 1996 Commander of the Airborne Forces of the USSR, the CIS and, later, Russia. Georgy Shipak, General Colonel, Alexander Kolmakov, General Colonel. After the fall of the Soviet Union, with the demise of the Soviet Union, the number of VDV divisions has shrunk from 7 to 4, as well as 4 brigades and the brigade-sized training center. In October 2013, Shaimanov announced that a new air assault brigade would be formed in Voronezh in 2016 with the number of the 345th Separate Guards Airborne Regiment. It was announced in July 2015 that plans called for the 31st Airborne Brigade to be expanded into the 104th Guards Airborne Division, and for an additional airborne regiment to be attached to each division. 7th Guards Air Assault Division in Novorossiysk, 76th Guards Air Assault Division in Pskov, 98th Guards Airborne Division in Ivanovo, 106th Guards Airborne Division in Tula, 11th Guards Airborne Brigade in Ulan-Ude, 31st Guards Airborne Brigade in Ulyanovsk, 56th Guards Airborne Brigade in Kamyshin, 83rd Guards Airborne Brigade in Ushariysk, 242nd Training Center of the VDV in Omsk, 38th Guards Airborne Signal Brigade in Medvyezhye, 45th Special Reconnaissance Brigade in Kubinka. On July 30, 2015, the Airborne Troops Commander-in-Chief announced that there were plans to reform the 104th Guards Airborne Division from the 31st Guards Airborne Brigade in Ulyanovsk, the 11th Air Assault Brigade in the Central Military District and the 56th Air Assault Brigade in the Southern Military District were partially infantry formations reporting directly to the military districts they are stationed in. The VDV's training institute is the Russian Institute for the Airborne Troops, named for General of the Army V.F. Margalov. In addition, in the mid-late 1990s, the former 345th Independent Guards Airborne Regiment was stationed in Gudar-Uta, Abkhazia, up Georgia. It later became the 10th Independent Peacekeeping Airborne Regiment. The unit was further designated the 50th Military Base. In the early 1990s, General Pavel Grachev, the first Russian defense minister, planned for the VDV to form the core of the planned mobile forces. This was announced in Krasnaya Zvezda, the Ministry of Defense's daily newspaper, in July 1992. However, the mobile forces plan never eventuated. The number of formations available for the force was far less than anticipated, since much of the airborne forces had been nationalized by the republics the units had been previously based in, and other arms of service, such as the GRU and military transport aviation, who were to provide the airlift component, were adamantly opposed to ceding control of the forces. From 1996, the VDV dispatched the 1st Separate Airborne Brigade to Bosnia and Herzegovina as part of IFOR's Multinational Division North. The brigade unusually used ground forces equipment such as BTR-80s. After an experimental period, the 104th Parachute Regiment of 76th Airborne Division became the first Russian ground forces regiment that was fully composed of professional, soldiers. It was announced that the 98th Airborne Division is also earmarked for contract manning, and by September 2006, it was confirmed that 95% of the units of the 98th Division had shifted to contract manning. The VDV divisions are equipped with armored fighting vehicles, artillery and anti-aircraft guns, trucks and jeeps. Thus, VDV units possess superior mobility and firepower with these vehicles. Each division has both regiments equipped with them and the derivatives. With the reduction in forces after 1991, the 61st Air Army, Russia's military air transport force, has enough operational heavy transport aircraft to move one airborne division, manned at peacetime standards, in 2.5 lifts. The single independent brigade, the 31st Ulyanovsk, however, is not equipped with its own armor or artillery and may be equivalent to Western airborne troops, in that it functions as light infantry and must walk when reaching the destination. The 31st was the former 104th Guards Airborne Division. VDV troops participated in the rapid deployment of Russian forces stationed in Bosnian city Ugljevik, in and around Pristina airport during the Kosovo War. They also were deployed in Chechnya as an active bridgehead for other forces to follow. Russian airborne troops had their own holiday during the Soviet era, which continues to be celebrated on the 2nd of August. Their most emblematic mark of distinction is a blue beret. VDV soldiers are often called Blue Berets. Each year, current and former paratroopers, often in an inebriated state, celebrate by meeting up and wandering city streets and parks. The day is notorious for two common sights: paratroopers frolicking in fountains and picking fights with hapless passers-by. Notable former Airborne Forces officers include Alexander Lebed, who was involved in responses to disorder in the Caucasus republics in the last years of the Soviet Union, and Pavel Grachev, who went on to become the first Minister of Defense of the Russian Federation. Pride heavyweight mixed martial arts fighter Sergei Kharitonov went to the Airborne Troops Academy in Ryazan, and remains on active duty with the Russian Airborne Troops. Since 2008, women have been allowed to serve in the VDV as officers, after finishing studies in the academy. On the 26th of May 2009, Lieutenant General Vladimir Anatolovich Shaimanov became the new commander of the VDV, replacing Lieutenant General Valery Yevtukovich, who was being discharged to the reserve. Shaimanov is decorated as a hero of Russia for his combat role in the campaigns in Chechnya. His previous posts of the Chief of the Combat Training Directorate and Commander of the 58th Army. His most recent post was Chief of the Main Combat Training Directorate. General Shaimanov and the acting commander of the 106th Airborne Division were severely injured in a car crash on the 30th of October 2010. The general's driver was killed. On the 28th of January 2010, the Russian Defense Ministry announced that the VDV's air components had been placed under the VVS. Under the 2008 reform program, the 4 existing 2-regiment divisions should have been transformed into 7 to 8 air assault brigades. However, once General Shaimanov became Commander-in-Chief of the Airborne Troops, it was decided to keep the original structure. The divisions have been beefed up and there are now 4 independent airborne air assault brigades, 1 for each military district. The 332nd School for Proportionics of the VDV in Moscow was disbanded in December 2009. Posts in the Russian armed forces have been formally abolished. In October 2013, it was reported that the 3 airborne brigades under military district control in the Eastern Military District and the 56th at Kamyshin in the Southern Military District would be returned to VDV command. The process was completed as of July 2015. Elements of the 76th Guards Air Assault Division's 104th Guards Air Assault Regiment appear to be participating in the war in Donbass. These units appear to have been used as spearhead forces during the August 2014 Russian counteroffensive. During the August 2014 counteroffensive, battalion tactical groups of the 7th Guards Airborne Division's 247th Guards Air Assault Regiment, the 98th Guards Airborne Division's 331st Guards Airborne Regiment, the 106th Guards Airborne Division's 137th Guards Airborne Regiment, and the 31st Guards Air Assault Brigade were sent into Ukraine. Reconnaissance teams from the 45th Detached Reconnaissance Brigade and the 106th S-173rd Guards Separate Reconnaissance Company were previously deployed to Ukraine alongside ground forces units. In February 2016, it was reported that an airborne battalion would be deployed to Dizhanskoye, Crimea in 2017-18 on a permanent basis and be upgraded to a regiment in 2020. In August 2016, Russian paratroopers placed first place in the airborne platoon competition during the International Army Games in Russia. In the process, the Russian paratroopers defeated teams from China, Iran, Belarus, and Kazakhstan.